トビデオ
Hey, guess who we're talking about again today?
君の名前はユニコ、それしかわからない。白い角のユニコ、寂しがり屋の。
It's about time we checked back in on the little guy, wasn't it? If you're new to this show, 3 holiday seasons ago, I did a video about the fantastic adventures of Unico, a cute little 1981 movie about a cute little baby unicorn named, of course, Unico. The film begins with Unico somehow incurring the wrath of the gods simply because he's just that adorable. So the West Wind, taking pity on the little guy, takes him far away from his family off to who knows where and erases his memory so that he'll be far away from the baleful gaze of Mount Olympus. But since Unico gets lonely quite easily, he's always on the lookout for any potential friends he could make, which leads him on grand adventures. Sadly, the tragedy of Unico is that the adventures he goes on with his newfound friends draws more attention to his whereabouts, so at the end of every one of them, the West Wind picks him up and erases his memories of his adventures for his safety, but not the memories of the friends he made along the way. While the premise might appear to be incredibly saccharine in that specific marketable 80s kind of way, the film has enough depth and emotional weight to it to make it feel special. No doubt in part thanks to it being an adaptation of a work by Osamu Tezuka, the man whose pen originated most, if not all, the modern anime and manga landscape. And even though Tezuka's ultimate contribution to the film was only as a supervising consultant, his influence can still be felt. He writes a story that can appear cute and childlike on the surface, but soon gives way to a profound narrative that's sentimental without being overwrought. And by the time he's done, there's not a dry eye in the house.
It's so unfair, just because he's different.
And guess what, kids? There's another one. We pick up where we last left off with Unico, in the arms of the West Wind, being dropped off to a new, hopefully safer location, bereft of any past memories of the friends he made in the last movie. It's back to the old friendship drawing board for little Uni. After an unpleasant run-in with the so-called boss of the forest he's in, Melvin the Magnificat, and yes, I know his name is Yamaneko in the Japanese version, I'm just using the English names for familiarity. Unico stumbles across a mysterious magical flautist named Toby. He is trying to hypnotize the animals of the forest and turn them into mindless stone puppets. Unico almost becomes one of his latest victims, but an accident dropping him into the river saves him from such a fate. Unico then wakes up in a warm cottage within a nearby seaside village. There, he meets a young girl named Cherry, who lives there along with her parents. And though Unico is initially scared of her, he eventually warms up, and the two of them become the best of friends. The good times don't last long though. Toby, now with Melvin as his sidekick, barges into the house and reveals that he is Cherry's older brother. He left their village to learn magic and make the lives of his family better. But seeing that they don't care about his magic tricks, he decides that they, and the rest of the village, would be sufficient living puppets for his mysterious and capricious master, Kuruku. Cherry and Unico escape, and follow Toby and Melvin to Kuruku's magical nightmare island. The two of them will have to brave many trials and travails across the ends of the earth to stop Kuruku's evil plan to build a fortress out of his puppets and save Cherry's parents and everyone else in the village. (1983's Unico and the Island of Magic is a lot like the movie that came before it. It was bankrolled by Sanrio Animation, it was animated by the talented artists at Studio Madhouse, and it even became a staple movie on 80s era Disney Channel just like its predecessor. But what makes this different from the Fantastic Adventures of Unico is that this movie carries with it a lot more of the Tezuka influence. Yes, even more than the last film where he had a supervising credit, because Tezuka actually wrote this movie. Well, okay, not exactly, but it does feel like he has way more sway over the final product. Tezuka's thumbprints are way more apparent than they were in the first film, so even if he wasn't officially credited for his work on this film, that doesn't mean we can't feel the weight he put on the scales. What do I mean by that exactly? I mean that Unico in the Island of Magic takes what's good about its precursor and elevates its game into something extraordinary. Let's begin. Before we get right to it, a quick recap of the origins of Unico. Hello Kitty Company Sanrio approaches Tezuka in the mid-70s to create a story for the launch of their new shoujo manga, Lyrica. That story is Unico. Despite its short run, it was enough of a hit that Sanrio commissioned Studio Madhouse for a pilot film, which adapted the story Black Cloud, White Feather. When it got no response from TV studios, Sanrio decided to bankroll their Unico movie, and bada bing bada boom. But around that same time, when the 70s were becoming the 80s, Sanrio decided to milk this unicorn for all it's worth, and commissioned 2 films. But unlike the first film, which was an adaptation of 2 Unico stories, this one was going to be wholly original, and it was up to Tezuka himself to brainstorm that story. See, this is what I mean by him writing this movie. Starting in 1980, around the time the first film went into pre-production, Tezuka wrote a film synopsis that was more of a test script titled Unico and the Kingdom of the Sun. The exact information we have for its contents of that script are scarce, especially considering only 5 copies of that manuscript are floating around out there these days. But what we do know is that a lot of Kingdom of the Sun did make it into the final film. The character of Cherry is a given since she originated in an even early Unico draft concept called Unico and the Golden Planets. Also, characters like Toby, Melvin, and Kuruku make it in as well. And the plot mostly follows the same story beats as the final film, where Cherry's village is transformed into 2 living puppets, which prompts her and Unico to go on a journey to save them. But the big difference is the addition of the eponymous Kingdom of the Sun. Kuruku's backstory in this script is that he is the prince of the kingdom's queen Urania, corrupted by ambitions to become the greatest wizard ever. Cherry and Unico forging an alliance with that kingdom is a big part of the film's second half. And it all ends with an epic climax with the kingdom's army battling out against Kuruku's monsters in a grand Lord of the Rings style battle, with Cherry leading the charge disguised as the queen. Once Tezuka turned in his 43-page long plot synopsis, not script, Sanrio obviously told him to cut it down a few pages. Indeed, it did have a lot of scenes that would have inflated the runtime of what was intended to be a standard 90-minute movie. The script goes into more detail with Toby's estranged relationship with his family, and there's an extended scene where, in order to enter the Kingdom of the Sun, Cherry has to enter a dance contest. Tezuka took the script over to Madhouse and asked them to shorten it for him. But once they got back to him, Tezuka was displeased with the changes they made to his story. So, he decided to take it to someone he knew he could trust, Moribi Murano. Murano was born on September 5th, 1941, in the city of Dairen of the Kwantung Leased Territory in the Japanese puppet state of Manchukuo, which says a lot about how old he was. In fact, it was during the dissolution of the colony at the end of World War II that he had a life-changing event. While waiting at a school where his family was gathered to be shipped back off to Japan, Murano fell out of a second-story window and broke his spine, an event that would render him wheelchair-bound for the remainder of his life. 15 years later, he would enter the manga world and become acquainted with his soon-to-be master, Osamu Tezuka. Murano was one of Tezuka's assistants in the making of his manga, and he would join his studio Mushi Productions in 1962, writing screenplays and drawing storyboards for Astro Boy. He would soon leave Mushi Pro to focus more on his career in manga, and I'm sorry to say, but he's one of those mangaka whose work is only really well known and regarded in Japan and maybe a few European countries. Unless, on the off chance, I do happen to have viewers who are huge fans of Bark Bun Bun. Funnily, that was the manga that got Murano back into the anime industry, since that manga had an explosion of popularity that earned it a TV Tokyo anime. From this, it made it easier for Tezuka to control Sanrio into having his student be the driving force behind this movie instead of just another one of the Madhouse guys like last time. Murano would be the principal screenwriter, storyboarder, and director, putting Tezuka's original story onto the big screen. I said that this movie feels like Osamu Tezuka's thumb is pressed on the scale more in terms of direction. And as principal screenwriter and storyboarder for this film, Murano is that thumb. Because he extensively studied under him, Murano feels like the conduit by which Tezuka is able to channel his energy. That's why Island of Magic feels way more like a Tezuka manga than the Fantastic Adventures did. With Fantastic Adventures, while it did carry a similar vibe to its sequel, effortlessly combining bright cuteness with nightmarish horrors and sorrowful loneliness, it did so in a very Sanrio-approved way. The backgrounds are more lush and painterly, there's a more cinematic grandeur to everything, and the moments where it feels more cartoonish in a Tezuka way are only relegated to a select few scenes. It's quite the opposite in the Island of Magic. While there are lush scenes that could conceivably harken back to the golden age of Disney movies, the bulk of the film feels more like a product of those experimental films Tezuka directed back in the 70s, in that the artistry on display is more comic bookish and surrealist. The character designs feel more like something out of Tezuka's manga works. They are more defined by the simple shapes that make up their bodies. Melvin is this egg-shaped Heathcliff, Toby is an umbrella with a pompadour, and Kuruku is the Flatwoods monster made of circles. Even Unico, who looked more like a living baby creature in the first film, now has a design that makes him more like a stuffed animal barely holding on to sentience. The comic book nature of Island of Magic doesn't even extend to the main character designs. The entire Valley of the Monsters scene is crammed with designs that look to be scanned off doodles Tezuka and the rest of the animators did in the margins of their notes. There's a sketchiness to the designs of the monster children you don't see anywhere else in the movie, which also lends to some of the humor of the scene feeling straight out of Tezuka's manga.
その物知りのスリークさんは一体どこなの？わあ、余生をやめろよ。
The art direction of Katsushi Aoshi is also a major part of why this film feels more surrealist than its predecessor. We have the typical verdant Scandinavian countryside and lush forest straight out of an 80s Ghibli feature, but once the adventure gets going, the environments become these M.C. Escher fortresses made out of golems, or the ends of the earth being this otherworldly area straight out of Angel's Egg, where the lost objects have become so covered with dust that they almost look alien. The backdrops give Island of Magic this majestic, larger-than-life feel to it, which makes it easier to fall into its, well, magic. You get so lost in the sublime that you don't even question why the forests of Sweden are within walking distance of a vast featureless desert. But of course, all these features are only enhanced by the animation itself. For as much resistance Tezuka had against Madhouse changing his story, it does feel like a lot of the animators were on the same page with him. The key word for the animation of this film is magic, because the standout scenes are this laser light show of color and motion pressed on the celluloid, working in concert with the outlandish character designs and backdrops to achieve a dreamlike atmosphere, or at times, a nightmare. The film feels like a Tezuka work in how it is unafraid of being intense or scary, like with the entire set pieces of the Trojan horse guarding Kuruku's fortress. It's colorful and goofy looking, but its behavior and sound design makes it feel like it came straight out of a child's bad dream. No wonder this film briefly had a hold of the nostalgic article cottage industry in the early 2010s. But when it's not scary, it can also look gripping by how Murano and animation director Kazuo Tomoizawa make use of the simplistic shapes that make up the world to better implement camera movements. Or it can also look magical, like the scene where Toby turns Cherry and Unico into toys to hide them amongst Kuruku's collection, so when Kuruku comes by to play with his toys, this happens. The magical artistry is not the only element with Tezuka's influence. You also get it with how Murano writes his characters. Even in a more expedited version of the story, we still get the depth of relationship between Cherry and her brother Toby. They're obviously shown to have been very close to each other. The reason why Cherry befriended Unico so readily is because she misses her brother, and her going on this adventure with Unico in the first place is not only to save her village, but to also save her brother from himself. Toby, meanwhile, despite serving a cruel master and turning against his own family and village in service to him, always spares Cherry from a horrific fate. He never seeks her out when he's transforming the whole village into living puppets. He hides her when he discovers that she's on Koruku's island, and once he gets her and Unico out of there, he sets her down a safe distance from the island and tells her that she should not get involved anymore. It really assists that getting this characterization across are voice actors Shuichi Ikeda and Sumi Shimamoto. Yeah, Char Aznabel is Nausicaa's older brother. Tezuka's brand of odd comic relief is defined by Melvin. He's a guy who talks a big game, but is weaselly enough to debase himself in order to save his own skin. So of course he's voiced by Ichiro Nagai, a professional at voicing both tricksters and talking cats alike. Also, gotta love his quirk of having the woodland creature version of a Sony Walkman. Then, there's Koruku. He's voiced by Fujio Tokiya, who's only had a limited time as a seiyuu, but he really brings the character of Koruku to life. He disarms you with his fun, whimsical disposition like a jester, but when he gets upset, he reveals his true face as a snarling, raging beast with a heart twisted by hate. Finally, we get to Unico, who is more or less the same as we saw him in the last movie. Friendly, lonely, and extremely empathetic. A small little cinnamon roll in a cold universe, only brightened by the arrival of new friends in his life. His voice is tiny and fragile, but overflowing with love. It's a performance done well by both the late Katsue Miwa, whom we just lost this year, and by Barbara Goodson in the English version, aka Turbo Granny herself.
How are you going to do that? We have no idea how to fight Karuku's magic.
How does the story of the film work, though? Well, considering this was based off of an original treatment Tezuka wrote that was later shortened for length, it doesn't feel as quite as tight as the first movie. The first movie, even if it did feel like disparate stories welded together, everything did feel like it came together in the end. But here, I can see what was cut out of the final product clearly. Let me reiterate. Tezuka had a lot of ideas going into the Island of Magic, right down to his original synopsis having Unico's mother playing a large role, and a cameo appearance by Unico's original owner, Psyche. So even if we did get a story that does feel fully integrated into a cohesive 90-minute narrative, you still feel like there are elements missing that would make said narrative feel more complete. This critique is best illustrated in the character of Mars, the Sphinx's daughter. So at the halfway point in the movie, Cherry and Unico are trying to track down who could help them stop Koruku, and they are told that the best person to give that advice is someone known as the Sphinx. The Sphinx and the Sphinx's daughter are characters who originated in the story The Tale of the Fangs of Athens. Tezuka apparently liked them so much that he decided to put them in his Kingdom of the Suns treatment. Ultimately, the Sphinx was cut since we never see her in the final film because she's off playing, so we only get to see Mars, her daughter. Mars' role in the story is that she points Cherry and Unico in the direction of the ends of the earth, where they must find someone named Mokuba to tell them how to beat Koruku. And she ends up tagging along with him. But throughout the movie, Mars doesn't really do all that much or affect the plot in any way apart from being a screaming coward until she's turned into a puppet. That's because she had a role in an earlier version of the screenplay. The climax of the film would be that Cherry and Unico would get close to defeating Kuruku, but ultimately end up failing. The last one standing on the hero's side is Mars, and she would be the one to defeat Kuruku by tricking him through a series of riddles, with the last one being, how do you turn everyone back to normal? As we'll see, that got changed in the end, which sucks because the final climax was meant to be her finally facing her fears and to stop acting so cowardly in the face of insurmountable odds. So Mars now just feels like a leftover character turned into a pointless sidekick for Cherry and Unico. Real shame considering her cute design. Apart from that though, what does end up coming through is a really good story of love and friendship. Even in an earlier version of the story, Tezuka always intended for Cherry to be the main protagonist, with Unico acting in more of a supporting role. So even though the movie starts and ends with Unico, this is Cherry's story at the end of the day. Not that Unico minds, according to Sanrio producer Tsunemasa Hatano. Unico is fine with that. There can always be another leading role, and Unico can be a supporting role. Cherry may be an innocent girl, but she is driven to both save her village and her brother by any means necessary. Even when Unico is questioning whether or not she's willing to cross the scorching deserts to get to the ends of the earth to save her family, she reaffirms that she's willing to do whatever it takes.
そんなのないよ、そんなの。
地の果ては遠いんだぜ。苦しい旅になるんだ。あの人はわざとここで別れたんだ。お前が好きだから苦しい目に遭わせたくないのさ。
And it's enough love that Unico is able to transform into his fully grown unicorn form and fly her and the accompanying Mars to the literal ends of the earth. And when she's cornered by an increasingly enraged Kuruku, the love in her heart is what prompts her to keep standing up to him and demanding he change everyone back to normal. It's also at this moment where Toby's love for his family is given the ultimate test. And by the way, I will be spoiling everything about the movie after this point, so buckle up. Toby has been doing everything in his power to not get Cherry involved with Kuruku's plans. He's willing to do everything Kuruku tells him to do because his drive to become a great magician trumps everything, including his relationship to his hometown and parents. But once Cherry gets involved, that's when things get too complicated for him. So once he has no choice but to obey Kuruku's orders and turn Cherry into a living puppet, for the first time in the movie, he steadfastly refuses his master, getting himself and Cherry turned into puppets together.
Toby! さあ早くあの嫌な人間の子供を生き人形にしておしまい。このトルビーも人間です。ククルック様。
It's the climax of the movie, and only Unico is the last good guy standing. And while it may have been narratively stronger to keep Mars as the one to finish Kuruku off, Unico has something that can easily beat Kuruku, a heart filled with love. Hear me out on this. Rewinding back to the ends of the earth scene, we see our heroes meet the mysterious Mokuba, who, after being cleaned, is revealed to be a giant ornate rocking horse. He's been on the island of misfit toys, I mean the ends of the earth where all lost things end up, the longest, so he knows Kuruku and his story. Once upon a time, Kuruku was just a mere marionette puppet who specialized in playing villains and evil wizards in puppet shows for the children. But over time, he aged and his strings tangled, so he was thrown away and forgotten, leading him to the ends of the earth. But the place he settled was the one place on the island where light shone. So after centuries of absorbing the life-giving light of the sun, Kuruku came to life and was consumed by hate. Instead of becoming a real boy, Kuruku devoted his newfound sentience to becoming a real evil wizard like the roles he had once played.
お日様の光には不思議な力がこもっている。ククルクは自分を捨てた人間を恨んだ。
And out of his persistent hatred for the humanity who abandoned him, he wishes to turn them into stone and use them to build his wizard's keep. Kuruku is a sorcerer built on the power of hate, to the point that, thanks to his past, he sees hate as his own form of love.
昔は人を脅したり気味悪がられたり怖がられたり嫌がられたものだよ。 私が悪いことをすればするほどみんなに喜ばれたものだ。
We now come down to the final confrontation between him and Unico. Unico pierces him with his magical horn, wounding Kuruku. But Kuruku knows Unico is holding back, and asks him why. This is where, despite being a sidekick for most of the movie, Unico gives probably the deepest insight to who he is as a character. The reason why he seeks out friends is because he hates the feeling of loneliness. Not just his loneliness, but also knowing that others are lonely just like him. To Unico, loneliness is the worst thing someone could ever go through. It's why, even after all the terrible things Kuruku has done, Unico emphasizes with him, telling him that loneliness also makes a cute little guy like him think bad thoughts.
クルクさんは寂しいんだ。あんまり寂しいと悪いことしたくなるもん。そういう時あるもの。
寂しい?
For this reason, Unico begs to be Kuruku's first friend. And that plea for friendship is what destroys Kuruku, both emotionally and literally. Because his heart was filled with so much hate, it was the only thing literally giving him life and power. But with Unico's declaration of love and friendship towards him and him alone, it completely shatters it, extinguishing all of his power and destroys his spell over everything, turning everyone back to normal. But even though everything he's worked for has been dismantled and he himself is fading away into nothingness, Kuruku doesn't seem to mind.
憎しみが溶けてしまう。恨みがしぼんでし。私の負けだよ。
And with that, we end with Unico once again being taken away by the West Wind, his actions once again having drawn the attention of the gods. And once again, the friends Unico has made in the world wonder where he has gone, while Unico's memory of them begins to fade in the arms of the wind. Like the last film, it's bittersweet, but only a little sweeter because the film ends with the puppet that was once Kuruku washing up onto the shore and Cherry giving it a warm embrace. So while the film ends with Unico once again having to face a loneliness that awaits him, he at the very least prevented others from having to share that loneliness. He brought a family back together and gave Kuruku what he wanted in the end: a friend. It's unknown how well either Unico films did at the local box office. Those numbers are simply not available anywhere I can get them. Plus, while I certainly think it was in Sanrio's best interest to have it be a success, both them and Madhouse were churning out movies like mad in this period. The same crew who worked on this movie also had another movie out in theaters 5 days later, the horrifically real historical kids movie about the atomic bombing, Barefoot Geen. But regardless of how it did perform, there was still demand for more Unico, so much so that plans were being drawn up for a third movie. It was to be another original project with the focal point of the film being around the West Wind's more villainous sister, the Night Wind. Sadly, it never came to fruition due to Sanrio Films halting all production on feature-length works in 1985 and Osamu Tezuka's untimely death from overwork just 4 years later. So where is the Unico franchise now? In 2000, there was a 15-minute short film called Unico Saving Our Fragile Earth, a cute little film with an environmentalist theme that's noteworthy for having the Sphinx finally show up in animated form. It was a Japanese-Chinese co-production released to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of Osamu Tezuka World at KYOTO Station, which has since closed down as of 2011. The same year, Moribi Murano would die of heart failure on March 4th. But as of recently as this year, there has been a Unico reboot manga called Unico Awakening. With its first volume centered around a reimagining of The Cat on the Broomstick, released on August 6, 2024, Awakening appears to be setting up a potentially overarching plot about breaking the cycle of Unico and the West Wind that has to happen at the beginning and end of each Unico story. Only time will tell if this actually ends up panning out, but with the second volume on the way next year, who knows? Maybe we'll get Unico's return to the world of anime soon if it's successful enough. But even if that doesn't happen, I think Unico and the Island of Magic is as good a place as any to end Unico's adventures into anime, if only because it's the adventure that feels the most like his original creator's vision. For all the faults in the story's overall structure compared to the last film, the artistry on display feels like a step above. It's a more daring film in both the visual and storytelling sense, and I think that's ultimately what makes it work for me more. Even then though, I still struggle to say which of the Unico movies are the better ones, because they carry out their mission to the letter in different ways, but arrive at the same heartbreaking results. In the end, Unico is still the adorable little creature helping spread happiness and love to all of his new little friends, even if his time and happiness with them is temporary.
ジェリー、さよなら。
Thank you all for watching. If you like this video or want to support this channel, please donate to my Patreon. Each dollar can give you early access to my videos as they come out, as well as keep the channel running a bit more smoothly. You can also subscribe to the channel, ring that bell for notifications, or just like this video. Either way, you'll be helping me out. That's all for now. See you for the next round of tapes.
I'll teach you to make a fool out of Melvin Magnificat!
Oh!
Yeah! I'm gonna kill you!